direction do you want us to approach? And I think that staff was saying, I'm reading into it, and please feel free to comment, but the way I read it was that you wanted us to give you direction on what would be available, what's acceptable, what's not, size limitations, comments on fee structure, whether or not they needed to have a caterer or they could be self-catered. You wanted that type of input so we could finalize things and start up. But I think that the key thing here was that you know, the discussion around the past elimination of these events was around, we have these large weddings, they need to be 250 people to make for them to make any money. They take up all the parking place. Google had a big event at the park. There were no parking places. That there were a series of activities that were so large that the townspeople couldn't enjoy their own town because they were being run. The park was taken over by people who were really not necessarily town taxpayers. And so we made a decision, and then we found that we were actually hurting council or town residents. And I think you're coming back, and correct me if I'm wrong, with a suggestion of here's all the things we could actually have there. Here's all the people who do maybe use it. Do we want to put any restrictions on that or not? Is that?
Mayor, that is correct. And we apologize if staff misinterpreted the colleague's memo and by including weddings on attachment 2. But if we did, just simply tell us no weddings, and we have our pens right here. We're ready to strike out anything that the council directs us to. And as mentioned in your discussion on earlier items, we're here to get your policy so that we have clear direction on how we implement this. And so that's why we want to get pretty detailed, because as you can see on attachment 2, there are a variety of different types of events that have historically took place in the park. And again, we don't want to come back every time we have a question. And as a suggestion, if there are some things, because we're trying to peg everything in a round hole. In some cases, that's not possible. So in some of these categories, it's perfectly acceptable to indicate, for instance, if you want to put a size limitation, but have a caveat that unless it was, a different event was specifically approved by the city manager. So, you don't create a one-size-fit-all and again create another unintended consequence.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just so you understand, staff wants to facilitate whatever you want as a policy, but I will tell you now, if you say a corporate facility is different somehow than an associate facility versus a private facility, I'm sorry, we can't defend that. We can't defend it because the courts have said a corporation is a legal fiction. It is even a person that can be prosecuted criminally. And so if you have size constraints, or if you have parking issues, if you have some of these may create noise or some other things that we can fix, we're happy. But be careful that you say, we don't want any large events there, and then the first thing you approve is the largest event of the year, an Easter egg hunt with 1,000 cars. Because now we are going to be constrained as 1,000 being the maximum number of cars that can use that facility. And by the way, we already have a past history of allowing non-residents to use our park. So we're trying to work with the council to get what you want. And if you can define what it is you're trying to get to, that would help us, staff, get to where you want to be.
Well, so I think the Vice Mayor was going to go quickly.
I just want to, the reason that the Mayor and I wrote the colleagues memo for the February 15th meeting was because we realized that the unintended consequence of eliminating all bookings at the park as we had done was to preclude residents from holding a memorial or being able to rent the pavilion for a private party, small or large or whatever. And we were really wanting to bring this back to council and we did it in such a way that it memorialized the decision that the council had made to eliminate all of the bookings. But we said it is our recommendation that council establish a policy of event bookings for the remainder of calendar year for residents and other members of the public, knowing that we do have to have the park open to other members of the public other than Atherton residents. And for staff to propose how to manage booking coordination and revenue and expenses, which I think, Mike, you did an excellent job doing in your analysis. And I think it was pretty severe to show how much less revenue we are likely to make because of missing the wedding season and the delays that we've taken in not having a caterer on board. But we also went on to say that we wanted to limit the maximum number of occupants or guests at any one event, such that it would not, and it says in the colleague's memo, care and diligence should be taken to ensure that the bookings do not overtax the facilities of the park with unreasonably large numbers of guests at any one event, while also maximizing the revenue potential. Because if we're going to open it up for bookings, we need to, as Councilmember Carlson said, maximize our potential. The dilemma that we're being faced with right now is if we limit any, well, actually our colleagues' memo said that we're going to recommend we limit the rental of Jennings Pavilion to 150 guests at any one event. Okay, that's Jennings. That the Easter egg hunt doesn't take over Jennings Pavilion. It's mostly all outside. Am I correct? I mean, yeah, right. So it's not. Yeah.
They might have one inside.
They might hide one. So, but I just don't want us to get, you know, in a situation where we limit ourselves in a legal capacity and then we break that policy by holding something, a very large event. So that's the genesis. The mid-year budget shows that we've received $79,550 in revenue for the period of July 1, 2011 through February 2012. And so, we're kind of looking at apples and oranges here because we've got a fiscal year calendar and then we're looking at a calendar year calendar. So it's a little difficult to assess accurately the amount of budget, revenue and expenses.
Well, first of all, I don't think this item should ever have been brought back in this form. The colleague's memo was very simple. It was to modify slightly the decision that the council already made. What this staff report is doing is bringing the whole thing up again. The colleague's memo should not be addressing revenues or anything else. It was specifically to address what we could do for Atherton residents. And to me, what this has done is bring the whole thing up again. This looks to me, when I read it, like somebody didn't like the decision that the council made, so we're going to bring the whole thing up again. And if we continue to do that, we're going to be making decisions at this council 3 or 4 times. We made a decision at the council that we were not going to allow large events such as weddings. And why we're getting into all of this stuff at the moment, after that decision that the council made, is totally inappropriate in my mind. The colleagues' manual was to say, how can we modify the decision that we made so that Atherton residents for certain events, such memorials, could still use the park. That was my understanding of the situation, and I think that this is, frankly, I don't think we should even be considered. I don't think the approval of the colleagues' memo would allow us to consider all these things.
Oh, sure, go ahead. Sorry. Sorry about that.
What's peculiar about weddings?
Are you asking who?
Well, I'm just, we focused on weddings. Is it because of the size
I think if you really want that answered, which I'm not sure is appropriate at this time because of what we're doing, but I'll tell you, one, you have to acknowledge we don't know if they make money. No matter what anyone says, our staff report showed the only figures that we had showed that for 3 years it lost over $300,000. That's the first thing. It also, they tend to occupy almost every single weekend once you open it up. And to the extent that means the park is occupied virtually every single weekend by people who then deprive Atherton residents of being able to use the park for other purposes, that's a problem with weddings. If it's not, that type of thing like fundraisers, Easter egg hunt, swing in the park, if it's a town committee, if it's a special memorial, that isn't the sort of thing that has any of those issues as far as I'm concerned, and we should promote them on behalf of the residents and the community. But those other events deprive the community of the real use of the park.
Well, I think that you're going back for 3 years is not a good data point. Yeah, I can't disagree that the town was losing money, but we really didn't give sufficient opportunity to see how the new model, and I'm not here to talk about that tonight, but I think that, again, pricing, if we think that 200 is the right number, maybe we keep the same fees. If somebody wants 250, okay, there's a 50% add-on, or there are things that could be done from a pricing standpoint that would not deprive the park of revenues, would cut down the number of weddings. Certainly, you wouldn't have it every weekend if you priced it right. But I just want to point out that in the Easter egg hunt, there's less than 20% of those that attend are Atherton residents. And that's the largest event that we have.
And I don't think the issue is Atherton residents versus non-Atherton residents. I think it's use of the park for community purposes. And when you say that you don't think we adjusted or looked at the issue of pricing, for 3 months we tried to look at the issue of pricing and never got any firmer figures than the figure that I have just stated. So I don't know how much firmer you want it.
Well, we didn't talk about pricing at all. We didn't talk about pricing. We talked about past revenues and expenses.
We talked about profit, and at most we were talking about...
That's not pricing.
We talked about a $68,000. Well, pricing is clearly inherent if you're going to talk about
on a point of order.
Profit.
Can I ask our attorney? Look, we're here to discuss the colleagues' memo. That's all we approved last time. Where this discussion is going far above what the colleagues' memo was. We're not here to open up this whole subject.
Mr. Mayor, regardless of what the colleagues' memo may have said, the city manager sets your agenda. The city manager put this staff report before you. The mayor looked at it ahead of time. Nobody said anything about it, and it was published to the public.
The mayor didn't say something.
Well, maybe he did say something, but this is your agenda tonight. All I can say is the council. I think the colleagues' memo, maybe it would have been nice if it were put on the agenda exactly as asked, but that's not what happened. I can't say how it happened. All I can say is I'm stuck with an agenda that's been published, and that's what the council can take action on if you so choose.
All I'm saying is, and to the staff, this was discussed and decided at a previous council meeting. Why is it on the agenda in this form tonight?
The way I interpret the staff report, and I think the rest of staff, what's in the staff report follows it. You guys asked for expenses, revenues. There was no mention of limiting to a certain group.
Well, I would just say it's inappropriate to bring up the same thing time and time again when it was already voted on.
It certainly, I think most of us felt it did not pertain to weddings or large corporate events, but be that as it may, it's in front of us right now, and if we could look at what it is we do want to continue so that we get the ball rolling and stop looking at past history, which is getting us nowhere. I, for one, am thoroughly in favor of things like birthdays and bar mitzvahs and memorial services and fundraisers that are affiliated with the town, whether they be small or large, such as the Easter egg hunt or swing in the park. If it's a committee-related town event, then I think it should go on in the park. And classes, I think that those are small enough and they benefit the community, that those should continue as well. Everything else, I'd say no.
Large group meetings?
Nope.
So, if I could jump in.
Oh, yes, you mean, under the heading here? Yes. Committees, I said.
No, I was going by the headings on here. You didn't mention large group meetings.
Large group meetings. I did say committees, and that's what I meant when I said.
Okay, so I haven't had a chance other than to set the preamble, so I'd like to take a moment before we, see if there's any other council, and then see if the public wants to weigh in, because I think that's where some people are here today. But the colleagues' memo, we don't want to dissect it. We've got the agenda item as the agenda item is, but the colleagues' memo was pretty clear with the number of people that we would have in the pavilion, and it did mention get a proposal and discuss on revenues and expenses and things like that. So there may have been some misunderstanding, but I also remember very clearly the discussion in December, and the discussion in December was, as Steve Tyler presented to us, that to make things work, the weddings were some very large. They needed to be about 225 to 250 numbers. Those were numbers that were estimated. They were, and that's gave. Then there was a discussion with regards to the number of parking places, and then you can have overflow, and now we've got cars parking on the grass, and that's not good for the park either. And then so there was a discussion, and we've taken this off. And then there were some situations where it became painfully aware that residents who are paying for the upkeep of the park can't use it. And that's what we're here really to discuss today. Now, I realize that we can't discriminate, but we can set different fee structures that will encourage residents versus non-resident usage. But the issue before the council today, and what I'd like to at least get forward and push forward today, is that the people that own the park would like to use the park. And I think that it's appropriate that they are allowed to use the park. And I think that we should have some restrictions so that should a non-resident use the park, that we restrict it in some manner such that either through fee structures where it becomes prohibitive, or we put a size restriction on it so that they can't take over the whole park without us knowing about it in advance and getting, for example, approval by the town manager. So I think having size restrictions makes sense. I think having use restrictions perhaps makes some sense. I think if people are making money on holding an event in our park, whether they're part of Atherton or not, the town ought to be compensated for its costs. If, in fact, it's ACIL and they're having, for example, candidates night, they don't make any money on that. They shouldn't be charged for use of the park. Again, it's residents using the park, and they shouldn't have a problem. But I believe very strongly. I also believe very strongly, and I've taken a poll from a lot of people. In fact, even today when I was delivering Meals on Wheels to the residents both here in Atherton and elsewhere. And I took input. I asked what they thought about the park. And I got a lot of complaints with having a single caterer, and before when Jean Cardova had her own single caterer club, that people wanted to use their own caterers. And so people want to have a choice. We want to use our park, I believe, that's the input I've got, and we want to be able to do it our way. We don't need the town to set it all up for us. We don't need the town to police the caterer or give us only one choice of a caterer. People should be able to pick who they want. This is America last I saw, and we're allowed to go ahead and make our own decisions. There are rules associated with it. We need to cover our costs for insurance. We need to cover our costs for making sure the building gets open. There needs to be a deposit fee so that if somebody does some damage to it, that we can go ahead and get paid for it. But I do believe, and I'd like the rest of the council members to consider, that we do nothing more, if we do nothing else tonight, that we at least say that we will start allowing certain activities to occur over at the park. We have people waiting with some very valid requests. We're constantly turning a blind eye to certain things that are going on in the park that may or may not be in conflict with this. And we can't live to a double standard. Our taxpayers are paying for the park. They have a right to use the park. I voted on the ban, but my vote on the ban was with regards to large weddings that took up the whole park and corporate events such as Google. That's why I voted to stop the activities in the park. And there had been some discussion that, by the way, I had maybe misunderstood, that I thought that smaller activities such as birthdays and things like that could still go on. Then I was told, no, that wasn't the case. So, okay, I made a mistake. I'm changing my vote on it. But I do want people to be able to use the park. And I think that everybody up here wants us all to be able to use the park, but we want the residents, when somebody else is using the park, to be able to go and enjoy the park themselves singly. So they need to be able to park, and they need to be able to not have large events where there's noise and things like that, unless we know about it in advance, such as the Easter egg hunt, such as the swing in the park, etc., etc., etc. That's my 2 cents. If there's any other council comments before we go to public, I'd be happy to take them now.
I like Councilmember McKeithen's suggestions as far as the type of activities that would be allowed in the park. I think that would take care of all of our residents' concerns, because if we remember, the weddings that we've had in the park, 99.99% of the weddings were not for Atherton residents. And therefore, if we go with Councilmember McKeithen's suggestions about the activities that would be allowed in the park, I would be very happy to support that.
But if you were getting remarried, Councilmember Dobby, and you were having just a small group of people, say here, you know, maybe renewing your vows, that would be considered a wedding? Would that be considered? It's a small wedding, and I don't.
If I was considering getting remarried, I would be shocked first. So,
so anyway, but if it's a small wedding,
So if it's a small wedding, so we're going on something that was told to us by staff, that it takes 220 people for a wedding to make any money. Well, I think in that case, and I've always said this, I've been saying this for over 2 years, that our fee structure needs to be looked at. And if we have 50 people in a wedding and they pay $5,000, why would you turn them away? And you've got many, many residents of Atherton who would like to use the park as their wedding site also.
It's never happened in the past.
Well,
It's
I
never happened in the past.
know that that's
They've
not true.
never had Atherton residents use the park for weddings.
Oh, we have to take a census.
Mr. Mayor, another idea here. The community organizations like Park Foundation, Atherton Days, Friends of the Library, Atherton Civic Interest League, perhaps council could set up a third category of users. I'll call it, I've just given the name, designated community organizations that the council designates as being in this special category. And that whatever events these organizations want to have, they've got a green light to talk to the city manager about scheduling. That would take care of the Easter egg hunt and the other things. And then if that's agreeable, then we can focus on the other things that.
I think that's going to be a motion. I think that's fine. I'd like to amend the motion to say that if those committees are charging a fee, that we at least get cost recovery on that.
Well, I think that we ought to get cost recovery for any direct cost that these organizations, you know, the Easter egg hunt people have paid for the parking people to help park cars. And ACL has paid for a meeting room. Foundation, I'm not sure. But I think it's appropriate that if there's some direct costs that the town's going to incur, that they have a discussion with these organizations about how these costs are going to be recovered, and we don't just say that it's free.
It's not free. Right.
I agree. That sounds fine.
All right. So, do you want to make a motion?
I'll make that a motion.
All right. We're just voting on these small committees.
Well, the town designated committees.
Right.
So the local group meetings, and we're adding town designated committee events.
And this, I think that, you know, in the future, maybe there's a Boy Scout troop or something like that that ought to be designated as if it was an Atherton.
Can we make a motion on all of what we're considering to approve, on everything we're approving rather than piece by piece?
Well,
with that.
I don't know that
I
Let's
think
try.
we need to do these things.
I'd like to put it in buckets and try to get, kind of pair it off so we can focus on where we have a real disagreement or not.
Well, why don't we try and do it all at once, and then see if we have a disagreement?
As long as we're willing to get it done tonight. that's great.
I've made a motion already.
I'll second your motion.
So that's essentially just large group meetings now designated
The
as
local group
town.
meetings.
Yeah, local groups, excuse me. The town
Adding the
designated
town designated
community organization.
Yeah, the council would have to designate it as being a community organization would fit in this bucket.
That
Right.
kind
And that they would
Isn't
meet
a
with the
role.
city manager, they would meet with the city manager for planning, and that there might be cost recovery.
Can I just, again, unintended consequences. If the town, if the city council has to designate these organizations, this is the last meeting between now and the Easter egg hunt.
Well, that's it, it
Well, we're
falls
gonna
into
get to
this.
the Easter egg hunt.
Yeah, it's in
That-
under the games, it's
of,
under the
that's under
games.
the,
Well,
that's
I know,
under the local
But the
meeting.
Dames would be a town designated community organization.
Right,
So their events would go directly under your.
right.
And what I'm saying is, I think Councilmember McKeithen's suggestion was to look at the names of the organizations under local group meetings, and rather than have the council individually approve them tonight so that the city manager can work with those groups going forward, even.
Well, that's what I'm saying, that's what I was saying.
Okay.
I mean, that was my motion anyway.
And that's
Yeah,
fine.
but I took it as you saying that the council would have to approve them, which means in the future, and I
No,
think.
no, I said if there are any new organizations like Boy Scouts that maybe we want to consider as being one of these.
Great, but these would be the
For
ones
instance,
on the
Earth Day,
table
we did
tonight.
the event
Yeah.
with
I
Elton
wanna get
Sherwood
to the other
for
four.
the Environmental Programs Committee. We
You've got
had the,
So we have a motion on the floor, and we have a second, so can we vote on that section?
Okay.
Aye.
Aye, okay, so,
I'd like to make a motion that we approve parties and gatherings, which consist of birthdays, bar mitzvahs, memorial services, bridal showers, and anything else that's like that. Within, the city manager has some discretion for like activities. Group activities, fundraisers such as school picnics, graduation ceremonies, art expositions, ice cream socials, family picnics, and barbecue. Large activities and fundraisers, Easter egg hunt, swing in the park, jazz in the park, Valentine's Day dance.
Those are already taken care of.
Yes, can we take that off because it's already been
Yeah.
taken?
Okay, so long as it's clear that you believe they're covered. And classes, such as but not limited to yoga, folk dance, music for families, dog training, country dance, and Team Sheeper, which I guess we're all gonna sign up for.
I'm in.
And that's.
I have some questions, like the classes. I think right now, the fee structure for classes is a percent of revenues. And that may or may not recover
And I think
costs.
all of this should be done on a cost recovery basis to the extent.
There ought to be a minimum amount, and then anything above that, fine.
I'm fine with
Yeah.
that.
But we can just separate, I agree with you.
And we
can
take the park in
separate-
it as is
We
conditioned.
can separate the money from the vault.
We would have to come back with a
No, go ahead,
resolution.
Councilman.
I have no problem with it, but I think we need to vote on this issue first of all before we talk about money.
Well, if I could add, on all of these things, there is a size limitation, and we want to make sure that there could be an exception to the size limitation given the city manager, such as if we say size, for example, 150 people, but the Dames wanted to have the swing in the park and they need 250, the city manager would have to knowingly let those things go.
The
I don't
150
think we-
people were just.
Pavilion, and then
I don't
we
think we
wanna
have a
the
size
meeting.
limitation
Yeah.
until it's the
Yeah.
pavilion, and the pavilion will
Right,
determine
pavilion
size.
is-
Okay, all right,
yeah,
okay.
Right.
It's memorial services, that'll be hard to limit.
Yeah,
Right.
and people
Because
are
you don't
in
know
and
how many
out.
people were really.
Yeah.
Okay, but we haven't had really any public comment. I'd like to, can we have public comment
Yes.
first?
Well, we didn't have public comment on the last.
Yeah,
one.
I know that, and I apologize. I'd like to have public comment.
All right.
Because,
That's the right way to do it, go ahead.
please step up to the podium.
No,
Are you gonna sign up for a wedding?
if we had a big group, I would, Bill, I'm not being disrespectful to
Okay.
you. But are we allowed big weddings After all that discussion, I'm damned if I could understand what you're
No,
saying.
we're not including weddings or corporate events.
No, we're not.
No, all done. Good. Thank you.
Even weddings with 50 people.
Well, no, have we excluded corporate events here? We said talk about
Well, that's
meetings.
not in my
She
motion.
hasn't,
Oh, okay, you didn't include that, that group there?
And
Might have been better if
staff,
staff.
staff would suggest that we retitle that.
Yeah.
Not the corporate events, but large non-community, non-designated community organization events.
Yeah.
Those
Okay,
would-
that's fine.
150 or less.
Right, this is gonna be very complex.
No, actually, we're really just,
Non-designated.
we're just trying to draw that distinction.
That's
You know,
fine.
there is a benefit for local communities using their park, you know, local organizations. But non-local organizations, I think it goes back to the mayor's original comments, that you can draw a distinction between resident and non-resident fee use and other use as well.
But this is not,
No, that's right, and I'm fine with that new
Weddings,
heading.
weddings
That
and
clarifies it.
whatever name events, not local group meetings.
But that's okay, we can discuss that.
Well,
But we have a public comments, and we're in that section now.
Council Chair and council members, I am Walter Sleeth, I live on Catalpa. I am a member of the ACIL. I think you're headed in the right direction here, but because I had thought about this before, I wanted to, and I had thought of some general principles, I just wanted to offer those to you to consider in the mix. I don't think that you should necessarily determine that the events should be based upon whether there's a profit or not. The town is not a private profit-making entity, but organized for the public benefit.
Yeah.
So if there is a public benefit, even if you're, quote, not making money, I think you should consider being able to do it.
Agreed, totally.
Yep.
You should also consider the fact that if your variable costs, forget about, you know, how big it is. If your variable costs are being covered, it doesn't hurt the town. In some instances, you may feel as though you want to also cover some of the fixed costs that are involved. But I would suggest you just look at the variable cost as you're doing this. Certainly, for many of the ACIL events, we feel that that's in the public interest, and we ought to be able to have activities both in the pavilion and in the park itself. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Are there any other public comments?
Hello, Chair, Town Council. My name is Kat Nicholson. I am co-president of the ACIL this year. I wanted to bring up a couple of things. First off, the town volunteer situation is in a little bit of a crisis. Both the ACIL and the Dames are at the point where I've talked to the head of the Dames and she said, we can't get people to volunteer. You know, she said it's very painful and difficult to get people to volunteer to help with the egg hunt, which is something that I think everybody in our town really likes. And at the ACIL, we've looked at some of our participation going down. And so what we've tried to do this year, I just wanted to bring it up to add some ballast to what Mr. Carlson suggested, is our entire focus as an organization this year is on supporting the town and bringing in community involvement to support the town, just as a general focus. And so we actually consider ourselves as almost an adjunct to, you know, helping out. And we also understand that we're trying to cut the amount of money that we spend, and so we've lost a lot of people in the town. And so ACIL wants to offer itself, you know, if there's anything we can do, if there's something that you get input on as a town council, please feel free to contact us, and we'd love to follow up with that. That said, I wanted to just make sure that we've traditionally paid just a token fee when we've used things, and thank you for moving in that direction. I think as we've tried to negotiate space this year, we've run into who are you, you know, what are you trying to do? And I wanted to just really make the point that we're actually only here to help. And just to end up, we are releasing our plan for what our events are going to be this year And they're going to be things like Meet Your Neighbor, where we introduce the various community organizations in the town and try to facilitate people to come out of their homes, out of their walled communities, as it were, and say hello to each other. Another one is we're talking about doing a spaghetti feed for the police and the fire department in the town park. We're talking about doing a mixer for nonprofits. So those are the types of things that we're focusing on this year, and I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments, public comments?
Hello, good evening. My name is John Davey, and I live at 38 Maple Avenue. The four of you had a candidates forum in the park, and we tried to conduct our Meet Your Neighbors, and were excluded from being able to use the park to do that, so we've had to push the date out so that to find out what was going to happen. And this happened this evening, and thank you very much. I think you made a tremendous progress in agreeing to let us have an event, or because we got kind of hung up on the difference between a meeting and an event. And I was struck when you made the decision in the vote in February with the feeling of what does it mean? I mean, and you talked about it this evening. You're trying to put definitions around it. And what does it mean when you made the decision not to rent the buildings in the park? I mean, because it's been talked about too, a lot of unintended consequences. Because there were unintended consequences from that decision, and ACIL was affected by that. And I think you're going back and revisiting it and rectifying it is a great thing. I was disappointed by that decision, but I think going back and revisiting it is the right thing to do, and to qualify it and say, here's what we're willing to do and here's what we're not willing to do. I would even like to go back and reverse the whole decision, but it doesn't sound like that's going to be what happens. And the other point I'd like to conclude on is